The typical store-bought pressure-treated 2x6 12-foot was the choice I made while constructing this module shed. It allowed the removal of rounded edges while still maintaining the yield requirements I was looking for. An example, one 2x6 12-foot after rounded ends were removed yielded two 2-inch wide 12-foot long boards with 90-degree corners and minimal waste. The overall project length is approximately 8 foot by 3 foot, so the additional length carried over into the required cross members, obligating only 6 2x6 12-foots, or $100 to achieve the total frame of this module shed. Mapping out the frame, I allowed 2 inches of surface contact for attaching the wall modules to the base, as these will require some additional space when being installed. The frame is fastened with two 3.5-inch coated decking screws at each joint, pre-drilled to prevent splitting. You can elect to additionally glue your corners at this time, but I didn't find it necessary. Measuring the outside dimensions of your frame to ensure all ends are at the correct length will aid to square the subfloor later. Arrange the inner cross members according to the placement of each foundation block support in your design. Depending upon space requirements and needs, you may elect an alternate layout for this. I used West Fraser 23/32 inch thick OSB for my deck. A thick base will aid in the structural integrity, and discarding the groove and tongue wasn't an issue. Mapping mark lines and using a measuring guide to locate center of the cross members is an effective way of attaching the OSB. I recommend gluing and securing with 2-inch deck screws. After the completion of this step, turn the base over to expose the undersection. This will be the side facing ground. You can seal the inside of the frame at this time using a silicone base or any recommended insulated rated product. I use thermoply structural sheeting by Ox. It is used in home construction for external wall underlayment during the installation of cement board siding, and that is the product that I will be working with. Although gluing thermoply isn't listed as an installation choice, I recommend doing so prior to securing with 1.5-inch staples due to the inverted hanging position. Both thermoply and cement board is cut with a straight edge and a sharp standard size utility knife. Basic 60 grit sandpaper was used to clean up rough sides of the cement board and provided a cleaner finished look. Using discarded sections of cement board to complete this section calls for some creative configurations. I decided to attach the cement boarding with coated 2-inch cement board screws. They will provide the long-term support required for this inverted hanging section. Using Dynaflex Ultra DAP, an external paintable sealant that offers a 10-year weather guard, I closed the gaps in my cement board. In this inverted position, keeping unwanted moisture from the base of your module shed will prolong the life. Since that is the goal and not too concerned with the look of the bottom of my shed, I don't mind using a dark brown color and a small putty knife to fill in and smooth out the seal. Measuring, cutting, and drilling the cement board siding trim no longer calls for just a straight edge and a utility knife. Several recommendations are given to effectively cut this 1-inch thick trim, but the one that I found most useful is a circular saw with a framing style blade installed. Proper ventilation and eye protection is required. Pre-drilling and countersinking when attaching the trim will help produce a fastener-free look when painted. I'm providing an overhang of the trim at the bottom and top of my module shed. This overhang at the bottom gives the foundation blocks a concealment space and rainwater a drip loop. At the top, it provides a guide base for the first rung of siding being installed, as well as protection from the elements for the wall module frame. Once installed, a high-rated exterior sealant around the bottom side of the shed base and trim is recommended. Construction of the side modules for this shed will require the same lengths that were laid out for the bottom deck and should fit snug within the already installed trim along the outside dimensions of your shed base. Requiring a difference in height to create the roof pitch desired, I cut my support boards to match one 36 inches tall back wall and the other 32 inches tall front wall. I found this was an appropriate height that would allow me to bend over and draw out any item down to the bottom of the shed floor. Maintaining the 2-inch wide rung boards but thicker corner boards will aid in the support and provide posts for the module wall connections. I spaced and measured out 3 additional support members to provide a secure position for the hinges and support the opening and closing of the shed lid. Marking a starting point on the bottom section of the wall frame using the distance between the top of the trim attached to the base of the shed and the inside base OSB floor as a formula to subtract from gives a starting point to position my 1-inch ribs 7 inches apart. Laying out a sample of the siding material being used as a guide to confirm your spacing prior to committing is also recommended. After transferring position marks for the ribs onto the support members, laying out and positioning each crossmember rib per section is needed. If spacing between support members are not exact, then laying out each section of ribs just after being cut matching that pattern should aid in the process. Using finishing nails to temporarily hold in place ribs prior to pre-drilling and screwing with 2-inch coated deck screws will aid in keeping materials in position to accomplish the task. Once construction of the frame is complete, a weather barrier is needed, and thermal ply structural sheeting by Ox provides that. Glue sheeting to frame just prior to permanently installing with the recommended 1 1/4-inch staples. I am needing to cut down the last 2x6 lumber for the side sections to proceed. At this point, the shed base is fitted and turned right side up, perched on bricks for painting. The front and back main walls are sheathed, installed, and positioned on the shed base. The lower frame section of each main wall was pre-drilled and attached using 3.5-inch coated decking screws, 2 evenly positioned between each support member. A temporary cross brace is installed that keeps the wall's upper distance the same as the base. Measurements were taken from the bottom of the base to the top of each front and back wall unit, another along the base and top for a wall-to-wall length. Add 2 vertical supports for attaching the cement siding and sheathing. Square and clamp panel in place. Pre-drill attaching with 3.5-inch decking screws. Once both side frames are complete, remove panels, cut to size sheathing, then reinstall and complete panel frame. Ensuring all lockout guidelines are applied, a framing style blade needs to be installed prior to ripping down this 1-inch thick cement trim. The one being removed is new and only being used on wood, so I opted to replace it with the mildly used framing type blade I was already using on this type of material. While trimming down these oversized cement boards that I'm installing, full ventilation, personal eye protection, and a face-fitted air filtering device was also being used. Working with material previously determined as waste and discarded, I was able to yield 2 full widths from each board in several indispensable rung lengths. An OSB side gate to accompany kept the material straight, flipped the board to keep a manufactured look, removed trim from cut side only. When installing the trim, use holding clamps to position the trim manufacturer finish facing outwards and the cut side towards the shed. It will aid in concealment when painted. Measure out the thickness of 3 siding boards to allow the trim overhang. This will provide an adequate look and protection for the siding. Pre-drill, countersink prior to fastening with screws. Along the top portion, I kept my screw lines centered and spaced evenly along the side wall frame. Keep the cut side of the trim facing into the box. Long trim rungs along the top portion are desired, with budding trim ends when secured, sealed, and painted are rarely noticed. Keeping the end cuts of vertical trim covered when installed provides a protected finished look. While setting up the vertical trim drill pattern, 5 attachment points were made, 3 on the main front and back walls and 2 on the side panels. The vertical trim will accompany the side panels when disassembled. Lay out cement siding in lengths that closely fit the position being used. Mark and draw straight edges. Position cut mark over a raised surface and cut with a sharp utility style knife sufficiently. Position cut over edge of raised surface and evenly apply pressure until board breaks over. Folding upward should detach trim. Once discarded trim is removed, use standard 60 grit sandpaper to even out and smooth edges. With prep completed, position the first siding board being installed manufacturer finish facing outward. Rungs of sidings are installed starting at the base trim and working upwards towards the top. Dry fit into position and attach using no less than 1-inch 18-gauge finishing nails along the base, side, and center support members of the panel. Using a square fixed at 7 inches, dry fit the next board above the first, allowing for a staggered overlaying appearance. 7 inches is a standard spacing size when working with cement board siding. Follow the mapping lines of the center support members and nail all panel frame corner surfaces of the siding. Remove excess siding with a utility knife using the panel header as a guide. Snap over to remove and position the top trim and attach using cement board screws. Moving on to the front of the shed, this is the section reserved for the longest boards. Just after mapping out lines, I started installing each with a staggered length look. This ensures no two boards when stacked will line up along joining butt ends. These are installed just as the side panels are, spacing 7 inches between each rung and working from the bottom to top. A measurement is needed to fill in the last board on the first rung. Position joining butt ends and continue this pattern until reaching top of the trim. With all rungs completed, I started on the last board. Position joining butt ends, and again, keeping spaced at 7 inches apart. Take the last measurement to fill in the gap and transfer to the cement board, using a table saw to rip down to size. With the base, front and back walls, panel sides, and cement siding construction complete, attention is given to the hinge lid. Prior to attaching cross members to the main rung board, I transfer outline marks of the hinges being used to the back wall top rung board. Chisel out to match the depth of each hinge profile and attach with 3.5-inch coated decking screws. Completion of this step will prevent working with an unnecessary heavy load when connecting the lid to the shed later. Evenly marked out positions were made along the main rung board for the placement of each crossmember that stretched down towards the opening side of the shed. I placed each crossmember along the center, marked width and depth as a gauge to use during cutting. This will assist in the depth position of my blade. Take the thickness of the main rung board and divide in half. This should be the depth of your cross cuts. Using a circular saw, match the depth of your marks to the longest radius distance of the blade. Lock in place depth distance and remove material within the guidelines of the traced marks. Making several passes to create relief cuts approximately a blade's width apart. Discard relief cuts using a claw-style hammer and wood chisel. Using a table saw, remove the same cut depth from the cross members down to the same width as the main rung board. Each cross member should fit snug within the main rung board and deliver a strong, flat-fitting surface for the roof decking. Remove excess relief cuts with a claw-style hammer and wood chisel. I elected to install fastener plates along the lid rung opening, attaching the cross members to the front rung board for the lid frame. These are installed on the opposite side of the cut made for the back rung board and attached using 3 pre-drilled 1.5-inch screws. Glue contact surface of back rung board where cross members is to fit. Secure rung board, attach second half of lid frame, and hold using 1.5-inch finishing nails. The OSB used for the roof deck is barrier line preventing thermal transmission from outside elements to pass freely into the cavity of the shed. Position deck material to break center across support members to provide an attachable surface. Pre-cut or fix in place using the outside dimensions of the shed as a guide. Fashion in place using finishing nails or decking screws. Adding some cement siding trim cut from panels along the outside of the lid will provide protection from the elements as well as a finished look. To keep a straight border and maintain cover for the lid frame, I notched around the inside hinges using a sander and placed manufacturer finished edge towards the bottom. After attaching, I cut using a utility knife and broke over to remove excess. Using a table saw will provide cleaner cuts when measured out. Using an exterior paintable sealant, I covered any exposed openings in the trim prior to paint. Using an exterior base paint, the color selection was made for the shed to fit the surroundings of the location desired. This shed is going along the outside wall of the garage in the backyard area, so matching the paint that flows well with the exterior colors of the house is desired. Start with removing all debris from the walls and trim of the shed. Painting over dried mud, dirt, and sawdust will yield undesirable results. After laying down paint paper, I worked around the shed, completing a coat of paint on each section while allowing the others to dry. Using a 3/8-inch nap roller and 2-inch finishing style paintbrush, I was able to apply full coats of color to the outside and inside trim of the build. Working first the base color blue and then the trim color white. Once completed, I allowed to dry for several days. I was able to match the shingles type with the existing shingles on the house and used one bundle to complete. Waiting until the shed was in place prior to adding the shingles helped to keep the weight down.